Hello everyone. Welcome to our Diversity and Inclusion Summit. My name is Inês Silva, and together with Liliana Castro, I'm one of the founders of Portuguese Women in Tech. Portuguese Women in Tech has been around since 2016. We have been doing a lot of different initiatives to promote a more inclusive and diverse tech community. And we have done workshops, awards, mentorship programs. We have gone to schools to inspire the next generations. Have done like a lot of different things. But we are very, very excited with today's event. We had this idea of doing this diversity and inclusion summit for a long time. We realized that it's very important to work with women in technology, to work with the next generations of women that want to pursue a career in technology. But it's also important to understand like what can companies do to be more diverse, more inclusive, and really increase the sense of belonging. So this is our event. It's going to be a 1.5 hour event, but it's going to be very intense, very good with a lot of content. So we are very, very excited to have you here with us. We have a very exciting agenda today. We are going to start with a fireside chat with Manuela DH. Manuela has been a champion for gender diversity and inclusion for many years. She has been working in several different organizations in technology, but also very engaged with the groups that promote these topics. And basically, for the past 3 years, she has been a super supporter of Portuguese Women in Tech, and we're very, very excited to have her with us. We are also going to have Vessi Tasheva. She's going to connect with us from Dublin, Ireland. And I have known Vessi for many years. We have been together in the tech entrepreneurship trenches. But over the past few years, she has been focused more and more on diversity and inclusion, not only focus on gender, but also focus on sexual orientation and so on. So it's going to be very, very excited to also talk with her and learn from her experience working with a lot of companies from around the world. But unfortunately, we had a bad news this morning. So Stephen Nakana won't be able to join us for health issues. I was very excited to have him here because I met him in Portland in 2019. I was very, very inspiring by his work on diversity and inclusion in the port of Portland. So of course, we will be talking more about tech companies, and usually, at least over the past few years, we have been doing a lot of work and talk about diversity and inclusion, especially in tech companies, but other organizations and companies are also doing very exciting work. And his work was focused on building the port of Portland and also the airport, and basically what kind of design decisions that we need to do based on diversity and inclusion. He won't be joining us, but I'm sure we'll have the chance to hear from him later on in other events, because I think his experience would be very, very, very interesting. But we are also going to launch our Diversity and Inclusion in Belonging Playbook today. This is a document that we create especially for founders, professionals, people and cultural professionals, recruiters that are working basically in this area, want to understand like what they can do, very, very practical things that they can do to support a more diverse and inclusive company. And so we'll be also basically launching that today. So basically, this is it. So some final notes. Please leave comments on wherever you are watching us, Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. We'll be able to see them, and we can actually bring them to our conversation, so we can basically incorporate your comments and questions. And also, like before we jump into our first conversation, I also want to thank Scale Up Porto and the City of Porto for supporting us and to making this initiative possible. Through the call for activities, we have been working with the City of Porto for a few years now, and this is one more initiative that we are doing together. So basically, this is it. So let's get this show started. And as I mentioned, we are going to start with a conversation with Manuela. I'm going to bring Manuela in. Manuela, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today. As I mentioned, you have been the inspiration for us with your energy, with your focus on diversity and inclusion. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and the work that you have been doing in this field?
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much for having me this morning. Really appreciate, really excited I always enjoy when I have a public and a place where I can actually express myself. And actually, this leads me to why I do what I do. It was interesting when I was a kid. I was always being told to be quiet, not move, not be seen, not be heard. At home, at school, everywhere, and always had this urge, to be out there and be able to express myself. And I think this is really very much why I do what I do today. I think for too long, probably the first 30 years of my life, I tried to fit in with what society expected me to be, as a person, as a woman, as a professional. And then only to realize after, they always talk about the crisis of when you're hit 30, and I think I did have that crisis, and I realized that no, I need to be myself. I'm allowed to be myself. And in terms of women and the work around diversity, and it's not just women. I know we hear it as Portuguese women in tech, but it's way beyond that. It's about people who are disabled. It's about people who are considered minorities, blacks and others. It was about how I got to this is the fact that, first of all, from my personal experience and who I was as a person, and then also working in the corporate world, and in particular in the tech industry. This is where, when you start, especially as a graduate, I started working in the UK. I did not see a big difference because as well as many men and women, as I start growing in my career, as I start going to places like sales, for example, I started realizing I was in minority. More importantly, I started realizing that my way of being was different, and that's how I got introduced to Women's Network. And as I say, the rest is history, because I started getting engaged, learning more, being more aware, and it's a continuous process. So I hope that gives you a bit of a snapshot.
No, I think it's actually, you mentioned something. So I'm going to get off the script already, because I think you mentioned something that I think is very important. Because a lot of times for us, for me included, is like you basically you start getting involved, and then you start getting more involved, and it's a journey. And I think it's very important for people to understand that like, not like, people don't need to be full in from day one. They just need to understand, like, take their own, like, basically create their own path, understand what's happening, understand how they can contribute, what is their role, and go from there. Is that the case? Like, do you agree with that? Like, does it make sense for you?
It does. I think, having said that, one of the things I think about, why is this important to me? Now, in a way, it's important, first of all, to be aware, because the reality is, if you're in the norm, and whatever norm is, you tend to not even be aware. So very often you'll have people say, what are you talking about? I think the moment you start being aware something's not right, this is where you start thinking, okay, what's going on here? And this is, as you said, is start educating yourself. There is lots of information out there. There's people talking about these topics. There's people involved. And I think, as you said, that it's a journey, because I said, first I was in denial. I knew there was a women's network, for example, in the company I started with. And I was like, what are they talking about? Well, why do we need a women's network? And then I got in there, and suddenly they started talking about topics that, for me, I had normalized, and then realized that no, actually that is not normal. So I started digging into it, and then I started participating. And as you said, we can do as much as being fully engaged, like some of us are in this topic. Although, most of us have day jobs as well, so it's not something we do full time. Some people do. Or it could be simply, start noticing and saying, you know what, that's not right. Or, for example, you're in a meeting, you notice it's always the same people talking, and it's always the same ones that are quiet, saying, hey, it'd be great if so-and-so could talk. It can be as simple as that. So that's, for me, what engagement is. It doesn't have to be, going out there in the streets or doing workshops or talks. It can be simply as noticing is, who's got a voice, who's got space, are they visible? So,
yeah. So let's start by defining, like, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So how do you define it? And let's start there.
Okay, so there is, and I think when you originally asked me to talk, you said, what does it mean to you? And I thought, I really like that question of to you, because to you is the key onto whether diversity and inclusion policy is going to work or not. If you are part of the norm, and if you're part of and I know people don't like the word privilege, and privilege doesn't necessarily mean having money or having power or anything, but it's being in the norm. It's then you might not notice, and you might not realize why this is important. Now, for me, the reason why it's important is because I said I felt more than once in my life, and I still do as an outsider, being a woman, being mixed nationalities, don't belong to one country, one continent, being divorced, being a single parent, deciding that I'm going to live in a different house than my partner, working full time, being in tech. So you name it, and constantly questioning everything. So for me, it's a natural to think, where can I belong? Why do I always feel like an outsider? And it's interesting because when it comes to then organizations, so for me, it's about finding the balance between being able to be myself and being unique, and at the same time belonging to society, right? So, and I think for organizations, if you think about it, then if you think about, because everybody says, oh, diversity and inclusion is important, so it's the buzzword, it's the key element that every company, especially the large ones, say this is important. But why? It can't be just lip service. There's a lot more than that. And I think there's two, if you want to take very, very tangible reasons, I always say, look, you want to know why it's important for two reasons. One, to make more money, and two, to be fair. So if you want to talk about more money, because let's face it, most organizations are out there to make money, in terms. So, and the reality is the markets that they are addressing more and more are diverse, i.e. the customers are diverse. So you cannot, and in order to understand that market, understand those people, you need to make sure that you behave and you express and you do all these things, to mirror that market. If you take the car market, for example, the car industry, if you only have men when half of the people buy cars are women, chances are you might be developing some cars that are interested probably for men, for example, but might not be interested for others. I also talk often about an example that happened a few years ago with a company that decided to sell dark powder in Asia, when in Asia they wanted to have light skin. And that for me just shows again that you don't know your market, because probably it was just, so some people in marketing who thought this was a good idea. And then the other thing is, if you now speak specifically about women, because I have the numbers, a couple of years ago, the McKinsey Global Institute found that, if you gave women more equality, i.e. if they have more money, and they're active agents, i.e. if they have jobs and therefore money, you could possibly add approximately $12 trillion to the global GDP. So, if nothing else, I think businesses should really want more women. And who says women says also, if you look at Asia and Africa and the growth of those continents as well, if people have more money, if they have jobs and they have more money, they're going to spend more. So that's, in pure economical cold terms, that's number one. The second thing is, I think, to be fair, the reality is, if you think about, again, if you look at the world and the workplace, so whilst, older generations tended to view diversity through the lens of race, demographics, equality, representation, I don't know if you know, but by 2025, 75% of the global workforce are going to be millennials. And millennials, are not going to be in leadership positions. Millennials, they don't look at life in terms of race and demographics and things like this. They look at, life and the economy and the workplace as a melding of experiences and backgrounds and perspectives. So you need to create an environment where these people are actually going to be the majority in the workplace, feel comfortable. So, and what you also see more and more, from a fairness perspective, employees, partners, customers, investors. The public is now, in general, demanding more transparency and accountability in actions. So there's a pressure from everywhere with concrete reasons as to why diversity inclusion, is so important. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, sure. It was great. And I think the question a lot of companies ask themselves, like, okay, I understand that's important. So, and now what? And here's like the questions, like what companies can do as organizations, but also what people can do as employees of that organization to promote more diverse and inclusive workplace. Because I think like your example has been of someone leading, but as an employee, not necessarily like as the leadership of the company. So how do you, what do you advise? What have you done and what have you seen that works well?
Okay. So I think there's two things, and I really like the fact that you brought these two dimensions, because too often what I find is employees looking up and blaming management and leadership for not doing enough, and not taking responsibility. And then what I see is also at the top, sometimes the best intentions, but having a disconnect with how things actually work on the ground. So you need to address, I would say, both sides. From the top leadership of an organization, there needs to be a commitment, not just in words, but in actions, daily and annually, and investment. So let me explain what I mean by that. So first of all, having a diversity inclusion policy, and where you say, okay, these are our objectives for this year. this is what we're going to implement. So it could be empowering programs. It could be saying, it could be looking at the numbers, and this is something that I know eventually we'll talk about the differences between what's happening in certain countries compared to others. But for example, if I look at my current organization at Microsoft, one of the things they do, they publish a report every year. In the US, where they literally measure everything. And I've been in business for too long to know that if you actually want to see progress in anything, you need to measure it. So that's the first thing. So that's at the macro level, saying, okay, this is how many women and blacks and disabled and pride and all sorts of the people who are considered minorities, and what is it that we want to do for them in every single level of the organization, in every single job, and actually start measuring that. And then there's training, making sure that it's mandatory training that everybody has to do and that they can't just skip the training, right? They actually have to sit there and do an exam and pass it. Because as I said, very often, you're not going to convince people like you and I that this is important. We know it's important. That's why we do what we do. It's about making the others aware of that. But the interesting thing for me, then, still staying in the leadership, what I've started noticing, and you have to learn to take risks and be brave because it's not comfortable. But it's also questioning, very often what I've seen is at the senior top level saying, verbally committing to say, this is what we're going to do, and I'm very supportive of this. And you see, for example, in the Black History Month, or you see this during the Women's Month, or you see this in the Pride Month. Everybody's very vocal talking about these things. But then in important meetings, customer meetings, top senior meetings, or important events, it's always the same ones that go, and they don't take these groups with them. So I started questioning it, and it's like, well, look, next time you go to a top meeting or something, take a woman with you, take a Black person with you, take a gay person with you, take a disabled person with you. And then suddenly they look at you kind of, because it's almost like they say diversity inclusion is one thing, and in day-to-day something else. We need to question that, and it's not comfortable. And that leads me to, what can you do as an employee? That's the second part. As an employee, yes, and I don't want to take away the problem of people of victims, because there are lots of people of victims of violence, of bullying, and lots of things. But I also think that people can empower themselves as employees. So one of the things I'm a huge fan of are employee networks. And I know that in countries like the Anglo-Saxon countries, this is very, very common. In countries like Portugal, for example, I've noticed this seems to be quite a rare thing, because it's not a union, it's not an external thing. It's made by employees for employees, where you come together and you start looking at these issues. But again, so that's a second thing that you can do in companies, is join an employee network, join others, not just yours, others, just to be curious, to learn. And then there's day-to-day. And day-to-day, I think you need to be brave, and you need to be vocal. Is when you go again to, I'm the only woman over and over who goes to meetings and literally comes to a point where you says, come on, how many times do I have to explain this? I bring other people with me and I get resistance. It's not easy. Why do we need to bring other people? It's too many people for a meeting. We don't want to annoy the things. What's the value of this person? I can give you a whole list of resistance I get to these questions. And for me, it says, like, I still think it would be great for this person to be there, because if they're there, they're present, they can learn, they can add value. You can't guess the value of someone, so this is where on the daily basis, the employees, and this is my challenge for anybody listening to this. Next time you go to a meeting, next time you go to an event, who are you going with? Who can you bring with you? And look around you and says, is this person behaving, thinking, looking different from me? If not, then let me find somebody who will, and let me hold their hands and take them with me.
I wanted to go a little bit deeper in the employee networks, because I think it's super important. And as you mentioned, like in Portugal, it's not very common. We are seeing, and we've done some interviews with diversity and inclusion in professionals in other companies, Portuguese-based companies, and we are seeing more and more organizations also having this initiative. But from your perspective and from your experience, like, what should these groups be about, and what are some key initiatives that they can develop that are very focused on basically being more diverse and inclusive?
Okay. I think it's a really good question. And I won't hide it, I was quite shocked when I came back to Portugal. So I left at 18. I came back, last year officially to be based here, although reporting elsewhere. And I was, because for me, I've been in employees networks for so long that it's obvious. But clearly it's not obvious. And I think there's two reasons. First of all, you need to acknowledge there is a problem. And I think for me, the big thing that I notice in Portugal, we're still, as a society, questioning whether there is a problem of diversity, whether there is racism, whether there's discrimination against women, whether, I see members of parliament questioning this, not just on TV, but actually people I've actually met. So that's the first thing. So now, and then there's also sometimes a perception that employees network is a union type of thing. It's not. It's really about bringing people together, around common themes that they want to learn. But in terms of concretely, what does it mean? What can you do? So bring awareness is the first step, but very often the HR, programs actually bring that awareness of what diverse inclusion is. So I think you need to run this very much as a program. So you need to have a couple of individuals in each, whatever group of employees that you have, people who commit time, because there's a lot of, again, very enthusiastic people, but then don't make the time. You need to find people who are accountable and are dedicating 2-3 hours a week, to actually only doing this. You need to have a strategy. And the best way, that's what I'm saying, it's really thinking about it as a business, saying, if this is the growth of the company for the next couple of years, and if we need whatever number of skills, and this is the type of market we're trying to attain, let's re-engineer back and says, what do we need? Okay, so now what is it that we need to do with our people? And there is a piece of, for example, I'm going to give the women's one specifically. We said we need to communicate, because traditionally we don't like to brag about ourselves. We don't like to show off. We like to just do our work and think that somehow it's going to be visible. So you have a communication strategy where women write articles, where they go to public events, where they are visible, both inside the company and outside the company. And the attention here is not to talk about diversity, but actually talking about their topics, business, technology, all these things. So that's one thing. Then you have, what we call the internal empowerment. Again, two strategies. One is there is a number of areas that most people are not aware of, the unwritten rules of the workplace. For example, risk taking. Portugal apparently is number one in the world to be risk averse. And I'm sure that if it comes to women, it goes even above that. So being aware that people don't like to take risks, i.e. speak in public, or going for a promotion, or going for a role that they might not know. Okay, teach people how to take risks, calculated risks. If people don't know how to negotiate their salary, for example, do a workshop and explain, okay, this is how you negotiate. If people don't like to have difficult conversations because, they don't like confrontation, for example, or they associate difficult with confrontation, give workshops. So we, do workshops about these topics that everybody, not just women, not just Blacks, not just, introverts, everybody often wants to know, how do you do this? So that's the thing. But then it's also working as employees, reached out to the leadership and management. Very often in town halls or whatever it is, they say, oh, do you have any questions? Is there anything we can do for you? Oh, usually they ask those questions and don't expect an answer. And I'm like, actually, we do. We want to work with you. Here's a proposal. Can we work with you to educate your managers, the middle managers, the employees, so that it doesn't always come from HR. And I love HR, and I think they do an extraordinary job. But I think when it comes to people in the business, in the day-to-day, in the area, I think it's a lot more powerful. And then also for any business, we started working with partners with in the industry, like Portuguese Women in Tech, work with customers, work with other areas, and unite, because this is not just specific to a specific company or a specific industry. It's beyond that. So I don't know if that gives you a bit of a flavor of what can be done.
No, for sure. I think it's very. I think you mentioned a few things that are very important. One is we should not just focus our conversations on the issues, but also making sure that we use those opportunities of communication to actually communicate what we are doing. I think of course today we are having this diversity and inclusion summit. We are talking about the issue, but I honestly am tired of going to events and the only panel where women are, it's about women in leadership, technology, and business, and so on. So, of course, I still believe that those panels are important, but I like to see diversity elsewhere in others. So, actually, we have the opportunity to actually compete and be at the same level that others that are not minorities. So I think
I agree with you.
important.
And I wanted to give you an example. For example, when people talk about writing articles, I've never written an article about diversity and inclusion. I will talk about digital transformation, which is my area, and I will explain this is how I do it. And within that message, I explain how the fact that I'm different, how the fact that I think different, how the fact that my team thinks different, is good to get business results. And suddenly people start saying, she actually knows how to talk about business. And that goes into it. So I agree with you. This whole, and often what I've seen, in a lot of areas is, let's raise the topic. I'm like, I think everybody knows about the topic, but it doesn't resonate with them because it's too theoretical, and it needs to be a lot more in day-to-day concrete areas, technology, sales, delivery, project management. So, yeah.
Yeah. And another thing that you mentioned, I think that's is to have allies. So basically talk with HR, talk with the leadership of the company, talk with other groups as well. So we can all come together, because I think the worst thing that we can do is just have separate groups that are fighting each other, which doesn't make sense at all. And this is good for everyone. Having a more diverse and inclusive company is good for everyone, for every person that works there. So let's make sure that we are allies, that we are working together to get to this place where we all want to be.
I think it's really important. Now, that's one of the things we've done as well. Now, if I talk about specifically Microsoft in Portugal, yes, we have a women's network and we're building the strategy and we're starting to deliver. And that's the other thing, do something concrete rather than sometimes we plan and we plan and we plan. And we say, no, we're going to focus on 2-3 things, make it happen, see how it goes. Let's not strive for perfection. Let's just strive for, that's what I'm saying. We started saying last year, right, we just launched, let's do a workshop. Let's invite everyone. And now, for example, we reached out to the Blacks at Microsoft. We reached out to the Pride team, the Gleam team, and says, look, we want to work with the senior management about how we're going to start reporting the numbers and everything. So it's not just about women, it's about everyone else. Same thing with the disabled group. And so let's get together for these common issues. And because then we're a lot stronger as well as groups than if it's individual groups going there. But the other thing in the allies is, for me, is those people, for example, as a woman, to think that, having men allies is really super important. Really, really, really super important. And because then suddenly, for those who are not convinced that there is a problem, their voice, another man talking is going to be a lot stronger, than women keep on saying, hey, you really have to include us because, et cetera, et cetera. So it's allyship for me is absolutely essential.
Mm-hmm. So now going to the question of you have, as you mentioned, you left Portugal at 18. You've seen countries like UK, for example, where I think these topics are much more mature that we have here in Portugal. What are the main differences that you have seen? What have you seen in terms of Portugal versus the rest of the world?
I think the biggest difference, and probably my biggest experience around the Anglo-Saxon world, so the UK, America, South Africa, Australia, these are mostly the markets I've been dealing with. And if I look at Portugal, and it's not just Portugal, but if I look specifically at Portugal, is those other countries, they acknowledge there is a problem. It's pain, but they publicly acknowledge we have a problem. And that for me is a huge step, so within those cultures and societies that my people agree, disagree and everything, but at least publicly, when the government tells you we have a problem, and I'm going to use something that I'm quite close to, which was a Social Value Act in the UK. It's an act, it's now legislation, which is in every public tender, 10% of it needs to ensure it follows a number of very concrete criteria. How many women do you have in your organization? How many other minorities do you have? Have you created jobs for the unemployed? Are you working in deprived areas? I mean, it's very, very concrete. And you have, audits afterwards, if you win that business, to actually prove that you are doing that. That for me is a very strong message from the government saying we have a problem and we're going to do something. And then that reflects in companies. When it starts there, you see the rest. I think the problem you have in Portugal is, first of all, acknowledging there is a problem. I still have these debates, in my family, never mind elsewhere, to saying, no, this is just some, in the case of women, this is just a bunch of left-wing hysterical women, who think there is something wrong or what. So I think we need to look at ourselves. We need to demand more things of the government as well. But it's also realizing that it is a patriarchal society. If you think about little details about Portugal, which you see nowhere else in the planet, the importance of family names. This family names and titles. This is a way for you from day one to differentiate yourself and make yourself above or below someone else. For me, this is the thing that shocks me the most about Portugal, constantly reminding people about their titles based on the studies, i.e. they went to university or they didn't, what did they study or not, which is totally irrelevant for whatever they're doing day to day. But this for me is something that most people don't even question. They say, well, that's normal. And he's like, no, actually, it's not normal. It's not normal that you call a person by their title, a title, whatever the title, but it's so ingrained in people's society that they don't question. The other thing is noticing, I was having a debate the other day, and maybe they'll listen to me this. I look at a picture of the nursery of my niece, and I see the beeps of the girls in pink and the boys in blue. And I look at this and I'm thinking, why? Why are you differentiating boys and girls? Because they're not sexualized at the age of 3. So frankly, what is the message you want to pass on to them? That you're different. You're different in what? They're too young to know that they're own, so it's, and again, the problem is when you try to talk about these topics, people often resist because it makes them uncomfortable, because we don't like change, and change is uncomfortable. And I think one of the things I've noticed about Portugal, and this is now looking at it from a historical perspective, is if you think about countries like France or Germany or England or whatever, they went through agricultural society to industrial revolution to services to technology, right? And that over 100 years period. So the mentalities had to evolve. If you look at Portugal, we were agricultural society, and dictatorship, jumped straight into the European Union. So we are one of the most advanced countries in terms of technology use and telcos. But when it comes to the mentalities, we're still very much the family at home, what people are going to think, what people are not going to think, those expectations. And I think that for me is where we need, and we're seeing more and more people, not just like myself, coming from outside, arriving here thinking, whoa, people, wake up. So.
Yeah, no, yeah. I think there's like I think culture and mentalities take a much longer time to change, and I think even though I think we have done a lot of progress over the past few years, and just the fact that we are actually here talking about it, I think it just shows that things are changing, but we still have a long way to go before we actually have. And I think like we haven't gone to concrete examples, but even the other day we were talking about like how people that we know that are part of the Portuguese mentorship program are going to companies and are still like women are still like hearing like sexist comments about their pictures, about the way they dress, even in 2022. And this is not like someone that told us, it's like we know these people. And so I think like just shows like how much, even though we have done a lot of progress, how much we still need to do, because I think sometimes people are not even aware how sexist and how inappropriate their comments are. So last question for you, Manuela. What do you think, like, what is your like advice for people that are leading now, like diversity and inclusion in their companies? Like they are not necessarily in the leadership position, but that like they are working with people in culture and HR department. What do you think that they should do? Like what, like 2 or 3 things? I think you already mentioned a few, but like just like to finalize, like 2 or 3 things that you think that they should do to support like minorities in the companies.
Okay, so if there is no employee networks, create one around whatever theme you find is important. It could be the group of the introverts, for example. We often don't talk about this, but there's a lot of people who are introverted that feel extremely uncomfortable in a society which is all about show off and being out there and selling yourself and everything. So that's the first thing. So take the initiative. Question the status quo. Very often, and I've done this myself, I would say it's easy, either to stay quiet but leave, and I'm like, don't leave, stay and question and question. You don't have to be rude or aggressive, but as I said, you're in a meeting, very simple things, you see somebody quiet, give them the voice, give them the space, bring them with you. I think also read a lot. And for example, I listened to a podcast the other day about people in wheelchairs, disabled people, and it just hit me how much bias I had towards people in wheelchairs, although I thought I was a very open-minded person, so it's talking, it's reaching, it's learning. So that for me is really important. And I mean, one of the rules that I have is, at the end of the day, if you consider yourself a citizen of your society, It's not, and in Europe we have this tendency of demanding lots of things because we are born here. You have obligations, and it is your responsibility to make sure that, like yourself, if you're part of society and you want to be part of it, that you make sure that others also feel included. So for me, it would be, opening your eyes, opening your ears, opening your mind, start noticing what's going on around you. And if things make you uncomfortable when you hear, go and find out. Don't run away from it. Go and go be deeper and to say, where is it coming from? And if somebody has a very different opinion to yours, just go in and try to understand where they're coming from. So I think that's really important. And my final thing, I always say, silent is consent. No matter what people tell me, for me, if you stay silent, that means you accept whatever is going on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Manuel. It was great talking to you and have you share your experience and very concrete actions that people and companies can do. So I will let you go, but thank you very much for all the support that you have been giving us at Portuguese Women in Tech.
Thanks for having me, and thank you for the great work Portuguese Women in Tech are doing. I love it. Huge fan.
Thank you very much. So we have Manuela with us and for this first fireside chat. Now I'm going to invite Vessi to join me here. Hello, Vessi. Welcome to our Diversity and Inclusion Summit. It's such a great pleasure to have you here. We have known each other for many years. I share with the audience that we've met when both of us were working the tech entrepreneurship trenches, so a little bit different from what we are doing now. So you are original from Bulgaria. You are now living in Ireland, and over the past few years, you have been helping tech companies from around the world to be more diverse and inclusive. So I think my first question to you is what got you started? Why did you decide to focus your life on this topic?
Hey, Ines. Thanks for having me. Well, I almost moved to Portugal. I started taking Portuguese classes back in Bulgaria, but then I ended up in Ireland 7 years ago. But Portugal has such a special place in my heart. How did I get started? Out of frustration. They say that entrepreneurs get when they get really frustrated about a specific problem and they can't leave it until they work on resolving it. I think that's what it was, just out of frustration in the organizations that I was in. And I was just like, I can't just keep things going that way. And I wanted to really challenge the status quo, to set different benchmarks for the industry, and benchmarking is a huge part of our work with clients. And then now creating the Trusted Leadership Index, we just want to change the standard for what is okay and what is not okay in terms of how diverse or inclusive an organization is, or how equitable.
Mm-hmm. Can you share a little bit more about your work? So right now you mentioned you are working with companies to set those standards. Can you share exactly what you are doing? What you are seeing in companies, specific things that you are seeing that are not okay, and what you think what are you doing to basically change that?
Sure. I'll give you a little bit of context in terms of what organizations we work with. So we are a global DEI consultancy. So most of our clients are North America, Europe, Brazil as well. But this global mindset from day one when we started, and hence even when we were publishing our 2019 Diversity in the Workplace report, the 2020 Diversity in the Workplace report, working across industries and geographies was very essential. And as a result, we have worked with NGOs, but also public tech companies or pre-IPO or gaming companies, fintech, etc. So this also ensures we have this we stay curious and we stay open for the needs of every specific client. It is important because some of the challenges are the same in all tech companies. For example, rarely there is a tech company where the leadership team is not dominated exclusively by men. And one of the things is to be really straightforward with them and say, well, we're not saying hire a woman for your executive team just for the sake of it. It's not for optics. You're literally missing expertise on your team. You're unable to capture to inspire half of your organization or half of the potential workforce out there. So that would be just a very simple example. But in terms of what we do, we support organizations in understanding what's the state of inclusion, belonging, trust in the organization. We do one-on-one confidential interviews with the employees. We create a survey, etc. So it's a very extensive report that we create for them. So if typically leaders hear, this person had not a great experience in our organization, we change that and we show them, there is a pattern. These are the themes that have emerged, and it cannot be ignored. So our goal or our objective essentially as a team of consultants is to really drive the urgency and convince all of the stakeholders, the executive team, HR people team, employee resource groups, the wider group of employees, even build the trust for people to be able to participate in this, to be willing to participate. As you can imagine, many employees can be like, I've tried so many times to bring something up. How is this time different? And it is different because people don't share during an exit interview the real reasons why they're leaving, but they tell us because we can provide that anonymity, and there's so many layers to it, and we can really challenge the leaders to the point. So some leaders would be uncomfortable with that. I'm okay when a client fires us because they're like, oh, we actually don't want to look at the truth, but we give them qualitative and quantitative data, so the truth cannot be ignored. And and it's amazing when a client listens to what we provide them, and we're working on a 3-year strategy and the implementation of that, rather than hey, here is a keynote for Pride Month. That kind of thing.
Yeah, that's very interesting because so every March, we at Portuguese Women in Tech, we also of course start receiving a lot of invitations because of March 8th. But I always have this feeling like I don't want this to be just something that we do that week of the year, because the rest of the time we just forget. And even though I think it's important, at least we have that, but it's also important. And my message whenever I have I go to companies and I have a conversation with people that work there is make sure that this is not just here. The rest of the year, we should also focus on making sure that we have a more diverse, inclusive, and people really feel that they belong here. I wanted to ask you, whenever you are doing those interviews, what is the difference between a company where people really feel like they belong, and where you have inclusion, you have diversity, and a company where you don't have that? Because I think a lot of times, for a lot of people, they for them it's this is not even a problem, so why should I care? But you see the differences, and a lot of times they are actually quite easy to see and to understand.
Yeah, maybe we can even start with differentiating, diverse from inclusive. I think if we don't have an organization that's diverse or inclusive, we lose our sense of what's happening in the world that we live in. So we're just saying, I'm gonna say that, focus only on people like me, and this is it. So if we have a company that is just diverse, that means it's not inclusive. We don't hear the voices in the room. And if the company is only inclusive but it's not diverse, then it's an echo chamber. So what are we doing with the room? Are we getting do we have the right people in the room? And then are we listening to those voices? That would be that is kind of the starting point here.
Yeah. In terms of the work that you are doing with companies, besides can you share specific things that companies can do to be more diverse and inclusive as well? Because I think something that you mentioned, I think is super important, is understanding the starting point, because a lot of times we don't even know where are we start, what is our starting point. So that's the first step. You mentioned also maybe making sure that we have a more diverse team leadership group, so to make sure that we inspire and we are able to work with everyone. But what is like what else like should companies do? Like sometimes specific things, because I think a lot of times this doesn't need to be necessarily complicated. We just need to get started and just like making sure that we are actionable and focus on getting results.
Yeah. So most organizations have like an engagement survey, or some do. Some just have a post survey. Some organizations measure representation. Now, these are not wrong. These are kind of the early steps. What we really want to know is to be able to measure more complex things, such as trust, belonging, equity. See which are the aspects that contribute to a specific experience, right? And then when we look at so let's say we're looking at a specific organization, we really start where they are. So whatever data they already have, we start from there. We don't have to do something that they have already done. But in terms of specific things, it's really the leaders it's absolutely critical we engage the leaders. It's critical to drive urgency. It's essential to be able to align the business objectives and the DEI objectives, specifically to be able to drive that urgency and secure the budgets that we need. And then being able to really monitor as things that evolve, and think about the journey as a long journey, because diversity and inclusion is not a journey that has a beginning, but it doesn't have an end. And the reason for that is that the world constantly evolves. Last year we didn't have a war in Ukraine. This year we have a war in Ukraine, or we're still going through the pandemic. So as things change, the demands for DEI change in the organizations, and the more diverse an organization becomes, we need to continuously learn and stay open and evolve there. So there is a lot we can do, but I also kind of hate to generalize in terms of like every organization should do A, B, and C, because it is unique for their industry, for their specific business objectives, for their specific values, and for the specific blockers that we have identified in the organization. But definitely engage the stakeholders, building this ability to speak their language, so we can then get on the same page and have them involved in this.
Yeah, I think you mentioned I think it's all a work in progress, never ends. As you mentioned, we have a start, but it never ends. And I think that's super important. You also mentioned the role of leadership, because a lot of times, I read an article a couple of years ago about the diversity, the people that were at head of diversity and inclusion, and how a lot of organizations were getting fatigue of just talking about diversity and inclusion. And basically what happened was leadership thought just having someone leading diversity and inclusion was enough. So it was that person's job. So they didn't care. For that person that was leading this diversity and inclusion, they felt that they were not empowered. They didn't have a budget. They didn't really were able to do much. For the people that were the minorities, they felt like nothing was changing. And for the other ones, the majority ones, they felt like that they were tired of listening to these conversations. So I think we very easily get to this point because of lack of leadership, because of lack of empowerment of the people that actually need to do this. Have you seen this happening in the organizations? Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, absolutely. A lack of resources very often are the problem. Diversity fatigue, and this is where it's really critical that we don't just show the client where the gaps are or how to solve them. We need to actually move the needle for them in their conversation with the leadership team to secure they get those resources. So let's say all of the employee resource groups. In so many companies, they're still not compensated for their time, that they're volunteer, and they're doing one of the hardest jobs in the organization. So say if you're hired to be Chief Innovations Officer, the resources that you get, the budget that you get, the manforce that you get is huge. Everyone is saying this person is transforming this organization. When you're a chief belonging officer or diversity officer or whatever, you don't get a fraction of that. It's way less. So, and you're kind of expected to not just change processes, which, or technology that we use, you're also expected to change the hearts and minds of people. Now, this doesn't happen in a quarter, it doesn't happen in a couple of years. It takes so much more. So it is a very tricky balance. So we have a client where we're moving into, we're discussing how to create kind of like a hybrid model, to have the chief belonging officer, to have us very actively as a consultant, but kind of like our team is their internal/external team. So we're constantly one foot in, one foot out. So we keep them in check in what's happening in the world in general, in the world in general, but also in the DEI world, and pushing them further, but supporting, with our expertise, because everyone on the team has a different expertise. So being that extension of, because one person in the organization cannot do it, but also ensure that the employee resource leaders, resource group leaders, have the time, they have the budgets, they are financially compensated as well. To be honest, 10 or 20K per year on top of their salary is actually not probably even compensating them fairly enough. But I think it sets a good example, which shows that this work shouldn't be for free, unless we say 20% of their time, of their actual 9 to 5 or whatever, 32 hours a week if it's a 4-day week, or 40 hours a week, 20% of that is going towards this. We cannot imagine things to happen out of nothing. So making those things happen and building trust. So when we create the reports, the State of Inclusion report and the strategy, we navigate that space for our clients so that the organization actually gets to see the report. It's not something that is, locked somewhere, well, virtually, because it's a PDF, but so it's not something that is just for the HR or just for the chief diversity officer or just for the executive team to see. It's for everyone to see, so that people feel empowered and feel heard, and okay, they spend their time for an interview with us, but they can see what the impact is. This is one of the starting steps in building transparency and trust, so we can have a high trust organization. We can talk about equity if we don't, or safety if we just don't have basic trust in the organization. And few people know, and I'm curious if you know that in a high trust organization, we have 74% higher employee engagement, and we have the same percent, 74% less stress. So imagine when we have a trusting environment, we can do our work, we feel empowered, we have autonomy, and we get sick less often. It means less sick days. There is a clear benefit for the company. It also means less burnout for us. So we are happier, more fulfilled, we're more energized, we're more productive, and we learn faster.
Yeah, I think that's important, because I think a lot, like maybe 10 years ago, the conversation was about because we should do this because it's fair, because minorities need to be heard. But I think what we are seeing here is we need to do this because it's there's also advantages for the companies, financial advantages for the companies. If as you mentioned, if the employees are they are in a trust environment, they are happier, they work better, they get less sick, less burnout. So I think that's very, very important.
I think it's a bit we don't have to choose between quantitative and qualitative research. We need both. And it's similar. Do we make a rational argument or an emotional argument for DEI? I think we need both, because for different reasons, it can be appealing to the same person, but also we have a diverse audience as it is. And some people will be doing it for the right reason. Another person would be doing it to understand better the markets. Another one would be doing it to empower their talent or to attract new talent. So it's for all of those reasons. I don't think we should be picking one reason and saying this is the right reason and this is the bad reason.
Yeah, that's true. In terms of companies that that are doing a good job here, can you highlight one or two examples of companies that usually you give as an example for the work that they do around diversity and inclusion?
I would say Dropbox are fantastic in their DEI. Twilio are great as well. Many of our clients are doing exceptional work, but our job is to also help them see, where they're missing stuff. But like Google, SoundCloud are fantastic. Lots of fintech companies, lots of open source companies are doing really, really great work, and not afraid to be ambitious and to have this marathon mindset.
Yeah. In terms of like for the people that are right now like the leading diversity and inclusion in their companies, what is your advice to them? So I think one challenge that they have, you already mentioned, is to get leadership support. So what should they do there? Another challenge is like to make sure that people really understand the value and why this is important. Can you share like some advice specific for these people?
Yeah, I mean, for people who are leading this area, some of them, I've seen this type of work to be assigned to like a working student. In Germany, it's actually very popular. It's given to a working student. So you can imagine someone who's essentially entry level or kind of like intern level, how much authority or influence they have in the organization. It's very limited, or the budget. Now, if you're a chief diversity officer, it's definitely better. But nevertheless, understanding where your strengths and where your weaknesses are, because this type of work requires cross-functional expertise. It's great to have HR background, communications background, executive experience, and project management experience. And typically we see the person leading it be strong in one of those areas, maybe two. That would be one area. So just purely functional. Are they good influencers? Are they good, are they just naturally influential people, not like Instagram influencers, but are they able to kind of woo their audience, and get them on the same page? But also in terms of their core competence within DEI, which are the areas that they're knowledgeable of, so they're aware of their potential blind spots. And based on those, to identify who are the external consultants or consultancy that can support them in those areas. Many diversity experts or leaders internally tend to have either project management or HR background. And this is where we come in with the business expertise, with the executive expertise. And then we have like for the different areas within DEI, we also support them there. But it's rarely to see someone who covers everything. So it's great to have that external support. And sometimes too, we have that sometimes with clients where the person who's hiring us is relying on us to say the truth to their leaders. And it is hard to do that when you have that power dynamics of someone else is paying your salary, they're not paying our salary. So we can always push in a different way, essentially.
Yeah, I can understand. Cool. So thank you very much, Bessie. It was great to hear about your experience, and you come from like really working with a lot of companies on this field. Are you optimistic for the future? Like, have you seen like a progress over the past few years, even though sometimes we have these news that really are heartbroken?
A bit of both. I think it's essential to be realistic, but to have hope. We recently recorded our online course on trust-driven inclusive leadership, and it's very much based on hope, stability, empathy, trust, self-care, and that balance of hope and stability. Looking into the future, but also being very present here, being able to do it as leaders. And I mean, it is heartbreaking to read the news almost every single day. So how do we stay hopeful? And I think trust is what will be making the difference in the future, in the organizations, but also in the world. who do we trust to take care of climate change, to lead the way in ESG work, in DEI work, because naturally it results in more migration. People were moving, the world is only becoming more and more diverse. So the challenges that we're working on with, they will not decrease. They're only accelerating, actually. So I'm hopeful that we will find the way, and trust is the key.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you very much, Vessi. It was great having you here, and so thank you.
Thank you.
So it was great to have these two fireside chats with Manuela and with Vessi. Very different experiences, but both of them very, very, very rich, that really bring us a lot of interesting insights. So now we are going to be focusing on basically sharing a little bit about our diversity and inclusion and belonging playbook. If you want to access it, you can already access it in our website. So it's available for anyone for download. And basically, we decided to do this because we realized that a lot of the times people were talking about diversity and inclusion, but a lot of the times we also saw that it was hard for them to get things started. So diversity and inclusion is a lot of times mentioned as a priority for organizations, but then is a priority inside our priorities. And actually, I think it was yesterday that I read that the word priority, for 500 years, the word priority was just singular. Just more recently, we actually created the word priorities. And the reason it was single was because if you really want to focus on getting things done, one thing done, you should really focus on that. We have seen that even though a lot of times these things are priorities, there are so many others that it's really hard to focus. So we realized how can we help organizations to know where they can get things started? And so basically we created this playbook, very, very, very easy to understand, that really helps organizations to know okay, so where should I start? What should I do? And where should I go next? We have some case studies. We share a little bit about the reasons to focus on diversity and inclusion, very much aligned with what Manuela and Vessi already shared with us. And we also have these 4 levels of diversity and inclusion in the startup journey, because we realize that a lot of organizations will just be in the beginning phase, where basically they haven't thought too much about it. They have maybe done a few, one thing or the other, but they haven't done that much. But then they want to go to level 2, 3, and 4, so they can basically, by developing more mature initiatives and really integrate diversity and inclusion in everything that they have done. I think something that it's clear is this is a journey. As Vessi was mentioning, we need to start by understanding the starting point. We need to start by having buy-in from everyone, and then we go from there. Some things are very easy to work on, like hiring, maybe onboarding, maybe even compensation, but other things are much more harder, like really focus on the culture and basically the invisible things that actually make an organization. So in the playbook, we also share the areas where you can have the most impact. As I was mentioning, hiring, onboarding, compensation, reports, for example, are great ways to actually have a lot of impact. Providing feedback, and I think in Portugal, in our culture, we are not very good at providing feedback, really giving feedback and receiving, and know how we should do it. And also mentorship programs. There's also a lot to do. With the Portuguese Women in Tech, we have been seeing the impact that the mentorship program can have on the people that are a participant, both mentors and mentees. And we can see that this is also very valuable for organizations. So this is just a few ideas of things to do. We also have a checklist, and this is just really a list of things that go from building a code of conduct to basically creating the reports, to making sure that people have access to, for example, unconscious bias training. So this is very easy to understand what we should be doing with in your organizations to make sure that you move towards a more mature diversity and inclusive organization. And this is not done in 6 months. It takes time, and we know that, but we just wanted to build this this document as as a playbook, something helpful to help with your work. We also did some interviews with D&I practitioners, so people that work in this area in different organizations, and that basically because they are working in this area, they were able to share their specific expertise. So we talked with Sofia Matos from InfraSpeak, we talked with Sara Gurgão from TBLX, we talked with Luís Simões from Lemonworks, Ana Sanches from Teleperformance, and Nadia Cruz from Natixis, and Filipa Ferreira from Talkdesk. They all come with different experiences, but all come with the goal of making sure that people feel like they belong in their organization. And I think that's the most important thing. These are very short interviews. They are in Portuguese. So if you don't speak Portuguese, you won't be able, unfortunately, to listen to them. But this is like but basically focus on specific ideas and initiatives that this organization have been implementing to make sure that they are more diverse, inclusive, and people really feel like they belong. Something that we shared in our playbook was the definitions. Today we talk about the different definitions, but one that I really like and we actually included in the playbook was that diverse is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being invited to dance, but belonging is like dancing like they're like no one is watching. And I think this is a very good and interesting way of putting it, like where people feel so comfortable they can basically be themselves, be professional, of course, but also be themselves inside the organization. So basically, this is it in terms of our playbook. I really recommend that you go to our website, download the playbook, watch the 6 videos that we publish, and I think this will be something interesting for you to basically to spend some hours reading and in the next few weeks. So I'm going to stop. So basically this is it from our side. This was like just a very short summit, but we want to thank you for being here, for joining us for this 1 hour where we share these ideas and what can be done by organizations to be more diverse and inclusive. I want to thank, of course, Bessie and Manuela for being here with us. Also thank the 6 interviewees that like diversity and inclusion experts and professionals that share with us their expertise in the videos. And of course, I want to thank again Scale of Porto and the City of Porto for supporting us and helping us with this organization. From our side, we'll be here. Please feel free to email us. If you have any questions, if you for some reason you are not able to access the materials somehow, but feel free to email us, and we'll be here to keep working on these initiatives. In September, Portuguese Women in Tech will be back with the 5th edition of the Portuguese Women in Tech Awards, and also with the second season of Future PWIT, where we'll go back to schools to really inspire the next generation of women tech professionals. That's it from my side. Enjoy the summer. And let's be in touch. Bye-bye, everyone.